Okay. Well, welcome and thank you for coming once again. I want to begin with a word of prayer, so let's pray. Father, we commit this time to you and just ask that you would work through this presentation to glorify yourself. Help us to understand more fully your scriptures and some of the things that have been discovered in recent years that illuminate your word. So, Lord, as we spend time going through several of these slides, teach us, we pray, and guide us in our discussions afterwards, we ask in the name of Christ our Lord. Amen. Okay. Our topic for today is Noah and the Black Sea. I'd mentioned this last week. Last week we went back even earlier. We came back to really the beginning of civilization, when society made that transition between hunter-gatherers and sedentary lifestyle, the very beginning of civilization. So we talked about Göbekli Tepe and what's been happening over the last 20 years as Göbekli Tepe has been unveiled. And that's a fascinating site. I've been there several times. And so now, today, we want to talk about, again, something very early in the book of Genesis, and that is the story of Noah and some of the discoveries, some of the data that we can cull from research that's been going on that has relevance to Noah. So, this is the Black Sea. Doesn't it look black? It's a black and white photo. It's got to look black, right? Many of you, of course, are familiar with the story of Noah. Back in Genesis chapters 6, 7, and 8, Noah was instructed to build an ark, a boat of gopher wood to cover it with pitch. And God makes this statement, I am bringing the flood of water upon the earth to destroy all flesh in which is the spirit or the breath of life. But I will establish my covenant with you and you shall enter the ark. Okay, and then of course, as you know, the floods came, the earth was filled, the ark was lifted up, and of course, civilization was reset once the ark had settled. When the ark settled, it supposedly settled upon this mountain. It's a photograph I took I think it's 15 years ago. It's in eastern part of Turkey, very close to the border of Armenia and Iran. I'll show you a map in just a moment. And I was actually fortunate to get this photograph because Mount Ararat is commonly covered with clouds. But here you can see some clouds, but you can still see the peak, okay, in spite of the few clouds that are evident there. So Genesis chapter 8. Starting in verse 4, we read, in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark rested upon the mountains of Ararat. Now, I want to highlight, rested on the mountains of Ararat, not Mount Ararat. So the question is, which one? Well, during the Middle Ages, we're talking about several thousand years after Noah, they identified one mountain in eastern Turkey that is the highest mountain and called it Mount Ararat. So that's the mountain that people have thought may have been the mountain upon which the ark rested. In Turkish today, it's not even known as Mount Ararat. It's called Agri Da'i is what it's called. Okay? So let's look at that passage. Okay, here's our Genesis chapter 8, verse 4. In the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark rested upon the mountains of Ararat. Now, in Hebrew, the word Ararat, okay, as you can see in Hebrew, understand that the Hebrew language has no vowels. It didn't in the past, even today, it doesn't have vowels. Okay? How do you know how to pronounce it then? How do you supply vowels? Well, the language has been repeated, at least in modern days, so that you just see the consonants, you know what the word is. Okay? But the problem is, how was this word pronounced thousands of years ago? Okay? So, as I show you, the consonants are basically, we've got the aleph, resh, and tet. Those are the four consonants. Okay? Now, the aleph typically is not translated as a consonant. So we've got spaces instead. Where do we fill those spaces with vowels? Okay? Our English language and our Bibles supply A's, and we pronounce it Ararat. We call it Mount Ararat. But if you supply different vowels, okay, this is Urartu. Now, many of you have never heard the word Urartu before. Urartu was an ancient civilization that thrived for 300 years, between 900 BC and 600 BC. The Urartu people, I've been out in that region several times, taken many photographs. I'll show you some of these in just a moment as well. Okay? Now, the Urartu people are the ancestors of what you know today as the Armenian people. Okay? And so when we talk about the mountains of Urartu, okay, we're talking about a region. Now, the eastern part of Turkey is elevated. The eastern half of Turkey, for that matter, averages 1.25 miles in elevation. So it's up there pretty high, okay? And of course, then you've got mountains such as Mount Ararat, but we have also other mountains as well. Now, in the Armenian language even, this is interesting, the word Ararat, okay, means mountain or holy ground. Okay, that's a common word just for any mountain. Okay, so let me show you a map. This is a map of, as you can see, Turkey, primarily on the left-hand side of the map. And then you get into the eastern parts of Turkey, spilling over into Armenia, Iran, and Iraq. You can see that yellow area. Okay? That is where the Urartu civilization existed for 300 years. So when the book of Genesis talks about the mountains of Ararat, or the more likely translation is the mountains of Urartu. Okay, we're talking about mountains in this region. Now, among those mountains, I zoomed in a little bit closer there. Can you see Mount Ararat? Okay, it's in the middle of that yellow splotch, a little bit over to the right-hand side. Mount Ararat, so that's where it's located. But the question is that the mountain where the ark rested? Some photos of the kingdom of Urartu. This is the capital, the ancient capital of Urartu. This is called Tushpa. That was the name of the ancient city. It's located today in eastern Turkey at a site called Van. Van is located right on a lake. It's called Lake Van also. I visited there. The last time I visited, a month after I departed, there was a 7.0 Richter earthquake that took place, and the hotel in which I was staying collapsed. 500 people were killed. Not just in the hotel, but in that area, okay? The Urartu people left inscriptions. Many of you are familiar with cuneiform script. If I zoom in a little bit, that's ancient cuneiform. I do not read cuneiform, so don't ask me to translate. Okay? But again, these are records which there are scholars who are able to translate this, and we understand a little bit about what the Urartu civilization was all about, which then morphed later on into the Armenian people. And of course, the Armenian people, there's quite a story about the Armenian people and the difficulties that they've experienced in Turkey, which we don't have enough time to get into. But and then we have The museum at Vaughan, a very nice museum's got artifacts, ancient artifacts from the past. And this is a stone relief carving of an individual from Urartu. And what might be interesting to you is you'll notice that a lot of the symbols that you see are very similar to some of the symbols that we had seen last week. Remember when we were talking about Göbekli Tepe? So over on the left-hand side, you can see a snake. You can see what appears to be perhaps just below the snake, a lizard. If you look over to the right-hand side of the head, you have almost upside down an ibex, and there are still ibex in Turkey. These are, well, they look like a deer, but they've got these huge, massive, curving horns, and then a leopard, which appears to be attacking the ibex. You can see some of the tools of the person here. You can see a spear, you can see a hatchet, you can see a water bottle, you can see a bow and arrow, you can see a knife, and then over on the left-hand side, this is probably the individual's wife. Okay, so interesting things that have been discovered about the Urartu civilization. How many of you have ever heard of Urartu before? Too many people. Okay. Okay, again, just show you a map of modern Turkey to give you an idea as to where Mount Ararat is. It's about as far to the east of Turkey as you can possibly go. You can see Armenia just across the border. You can see Iran not far from Mount Ararat. But this is the mountain where there's been a great deal of speculation and a great deal of research to try and discover the Ark. Okay? From the Armenian side, this is a photograph from the Armenian side. The church, actually it's a monastery. In the foreground is the Kor Virap Monastery in Armenia. And then you can see in the background Mount Ararat. Okay, so you get some perspective in terms of how close this mountain is to the Armenian border. In 1917, Vladimir Roskovitsky, a Russian pilot, claimed to have seen a large ship on Mount Ararat. So as a consequence, the Russians sent troops up there onto the mountain to investigate. Nothing was found. Later on, it was discovered to be an unverified rumor that had circulated. Later on, in 1959, Ferdinand Navera climbed Mount Ararat and retrieved a piece of wood that he dated to 3000 BC. Later, radiocarbon dating showed that it dated to somewhere in the neighborhood of 90 to 600 AD. So this wood was not from the Ark. Okay? And then James Irwin. Some of you may be familiar with James Irwin, an astronaut. He conducted several expeditions between 1982 and 1985 to Mount Ararat, believing that it was up there and nothing was found. Now, these are not the only ones who have conducted excavations. I shouldn't say excavations because they're not digging up there, they're expeditions. Okay? There was a drawing. This is by Edward Davis, who drew this. I'm going to show you a picture also of a cut in the mountain. And according to what he believes, the Ark, as you can see that up onto the right-hand side, tumbled down into this cut into the mountains, was broken up, had been covered up with the glacier. A portion of it was sticking out, and he went up there to investigate, and supposedly that's what he saw. But again, unconfirmed. Here is that cut in the mountain. I was able to get close enough to get a decent photograph. Oops. What happened? How did I get so far up there? Evidently, okay. So, like I say, I was convinced that there's nothing up there but a cut. This is Ferdinand Navarra, photograph taken in 1955. This is the piece of wood that he claimed came from the Ark. And, well, it wasn't from the Ark. Okay, in 1961, Life magazine. How many of you are familiar with Life magazine? Does it say still publish it? Is it? I don't think I've seen Life magazine anymore, but at any rate, many of you are familiar with Life magazine. They published a photo of a formation in eastern Turkey, not far from Mount Ararat. And the unusual formation, some people thought maybe, especially its location, maybe remnants of the Ark. Okay? This is at a site called Durapinar, which is not far from Doyubayazit. And so as a consequence of that, this caught the attention of Ron Wyatt. I've mentioned Ron Wyatt previously, okay? He's the guy who is a nurse, has no archaeological training whatsoever, but yet he has discovered all these things. And as a consequence, Ron Wyatt has gone to this site. He has produced a couple of videos that you can see on YouTube, where he has discovered Noah's Ark, okay, and has found petrified wood at the site. A couple of different, you can, like I say, you go to YouTube, you can see lots of stuff here. This is the guy, remember, who's discovered Gomorrah, you know, one of the cities destroyed in the book of Genesis, the Red Sea crossing during the Exodus, Mount Sinai, and also the blood of Christ and the Ark of the Covenant. I mean, this guy has made these fabulous discoveries, all of which amount to nothing. They're all bogus. So at any rate, this is the site. I visited the site also at Durapinar, okay? And this is the formation, okay? It's only 15 miles from Mount Ararat. So, you know, the location itself adds some plausibility to this possibly being the site. When I visited the site, this Kurdish man came trotting down from the village not far away, okay? And there's a one-room museum, and he opened it up for me to collect the toll, an admission fee, of course, and was able to show me the petrified wood, supposedly, which scientists say is not petrified wood, it's rock. Okay? And you can see some of the newspaper articles and things on the walls. And again, this is what you can see if you go to Durapinar today. More recently, in 2010, a Chinese and Turkish team from what is called Noah's Ark Ministries International they held a press conference in Hong Kong to present their findings and say that they were 99% sure that pieces of wood found at above 12,000 feet and dated back 4,800 years were from the biblical Noah's Ark. This was an amazing discovery, okay? They provided photographs. Here is one of the Chinese members of the expedition inside this cubicle, perhaps a place where animals were once held in Noah's Ark. This was convincing enough for Norman Geisler to make the claim that Noah's Ark is found. Now, it's interesting that Norm Geisler calls himself an archaeoapologist. He's had no training in archaeology at all. He is an apologist, okay, but an archaeoapologist, okay? And he makes this statement: Noah's Ark has been found on the mountain of Ararat, exactly where the Bible states it landed, according to 4 eyewitnesses who have been in it on Mount Ararat. Noah's Ark has been found. I spoke with all of them personally yesterday at the National Conference of Christian Apologetics. If true, then this would be the greatest archaeological discovery of all time. The chief archaeologist in Turkey, Dr. Belli, was present at the announcement, as well as Ahmet Turgulu, the noted native discoverer of the Ark, as were the Chinese representatives of NAMI who confirmed the find. Wow. We've got pictures of the inside of Noah's Ark. Is this true? Well, a friend of mine who teaches at Liberty University in Virginia, he is an archaeologist. He's an Old Testament professor. And I've talked to Randall. He was invited to be a part of this investigation. And so he joined them, but quit because he doubted the integrity, the honesty of the people who were involved, and concluded that the site was an elaborate hoax. And this is what Price wrote. A group of Kurdish workers are said to have planted large wooden beams taken from an old structure in the Black Sea area where the photos were originally taken. They placed them at the Mount Ararat site. During the summer of 2009, more wood was planted inside of a cave at the site. The Chinese team went in the late summer of 2009. He then says, I was there at the time, and I knew at that time about the hoax. And they were shown the cave with the wood, and they made their film. Okay? But again, it's a hoax. Nothing was found. As much as it would be wonderful to find Noah's Ark on Mount Ararat, nothing has been found. So then I asked the question, was it even at Mount Ararat? Now there's another mountain in the area of Ararat where the Urartu people were dwelling, and this is called Judida. Da simply means mountain, so we call it Mount Judi. It's actually spelled C-U-D-I, but the C in Turkish is pronounced with a J sound, so we call it Judi. Okay? And this is a photograph of Judida. This is located, again, in the area where the Armenian people, so when we talk about, remember the book of Genesis says, the mountains of Urartu. The mountains. Doesn't specify, doesn't say the highest mountains. You know? And so we can look at the different locations here. Still in eastern Turkey, not far from Cizre and another small town called Silopi. We actually had a student at Huntington University who came from Silopi, which is right at the foot of Judida. So I've asked him a couple of times if he would accompany me to the mountain. He says no. He says they have mined the area because the PKK, which is a terrorist organization for the Kurdish people, okay, have been using that as a staging ground, and he claims that the military has mined the area. I still want to go because I think that's just the military saying they mined it, because Turkish people wouldn't mine their own land, would they? It's ridiculous. So at any rate, hopefully at some time I'll be able to go to Mount Judi, but I've never been there. You can see here, I show you this picture because it's a picture of an ibex. Remember we talked about ibex just a moment ago, perched on one of the cliffs at Judida. You can see the wintertime and the snow in the background. Okay. According to early church traditions, this is where the mount came to, or the ark came to rest. It's also supported by Muslim traditions. I don't put a whole lot of stock into Muslim traditions, but the Muslims also believed in Noah and the story of Noah and the flood. And also interesting, there's a Byzantine church that was constructed on Judida. So there are many scholars who believe that if the ark has survived at all, and that's another question that needs to be addressed. Can an ark, which is supposedly several thousands of years old, made of wood, survive over the years? Who knows? Okay? But many people believe that if it has survived, it would be on this mountain rather than Mount Ararat. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about, you're probably scratching your head at this point in time saying, why have you entitled this discussion, Noah and the Black Sea? Of what relevance is the Black Sea to the flood in the story of Noah? Well, it's interesting because in year 2000, an expedition was conducted, an underwater expedition was conducted at the Black Sea. So you can see the report here. And they made some very interesting discoveries. Okay? If you look at the Black Sea, you can see the Black Sea is surrounded by mountains all over the place. Mountains from Russia, mountains from Georgia. The whole southern coast of the Black Sea is the northern part of Turkey. So that whole long band is Turkey, and those mountains pour water into the Black Sea. If you look at Bulgaria, look at Romania, even if you look at Ukraine, the mountains, you can see all the rivers that are dumping water into the Black Sea. So as a conclusion, to conclude from that, the Black Sea should be a freshwater lake. Would you not agree? But it's not. That's interesting. So there's been, since 2000, a great deal of research that's been going on at the Black Sea. And one of the things that they've noticed is that the Black Sea has different layers. The upper layer is fresh water. You go a little bit deeper, we have brackish water, that is a mixture of salt water with fresh water. And then you get down into the deepest layers there, you have salt water, dense salt water. And most of it is hydrogen sulfate. Okay? And it is also lacking oxygen. It's called anoxic. So as a consequence, there's no life down at the bottom of the Black Sea. Again, that's very unusual. A lot of people who are doing research currently in the Black Sea are very much concerned about the sea life in the Black Sea, because as the lower layers mix to some degree with the hydrogen sulfate, and this anoxic layer, it does not bode well for marine life and the life in the Black Sea. So you can see some of these research projects that have been conducted. 87% of the water in the Black Sea, and that is the lower part in particular, is this salt anoxic layer. This is another picture where you can see the upper layer, let me zoom in on this a little closer, is oxygenated. That is, there's oxygen, there's as a consequence sea life in that upper layer. Then we have another layer where we have a mixed coexistence layer where there's less oxygen, where the water is what we call brackish. In other words, it's got salt water, but it's not as salty as seawater. And then the lowest layer, you can see in the darkest color, is anoxic, which means there's no oxygen down there. Very unusual. So, let's talk about some of the unusual features of the Black Sea. It's salt water at the bottom, middle layer is brackish water, top layer somewhat fresh water. Okay? An anoxic zone constituting 87% of the sea's bottom, with a little bit of H2O, but mostly it's hydrogen sulfide, and it's the largest anoxic water basin in the world. Now, where does this hydrogen sulfide come from? I should ask Bill this question, right? Volcanic activity, hot springs, and the natural decay of organic material in waters with low oxygen. Okay? So, I was really scratching our heads thinking, what does this all mean? And how is this related to Noah? So we asked the question, what could have caused this unusual phenomenon? This is something we don't see anywhere else in the world. What could have happened? Well, the answer to that may be, and again, scholars are asking the same question I'm asking you. I'm hoping you have a solution. Okay? Earthquakes. We know that Anatolian plate, that is the tectonic plate upon which Turkey currently resides, is the world's most active tectonic plate. It's one of the reasons why there's so many earthquakes in Turkey. You may recall a year and a half ago, February of 2023, 2 earthquakes, 7.8 Richter earthquakes took place with the result that over 50,000 people were killed in ancient Antioch. This is the Antioch that's mentioned in the Acts of the Apostles. Today it's a city called Antakya. I've been there twice since the earthquake. Another 5,000 people were killed in Syria. Antakya is located near to Syria. And so just devastating earthquakes. And again, that's because it's on this tectonic plate that is moving constantly. So just to show you a little bit about the seismic activity that's going on, the much larger Arabian plate, which lies to the south of the Anatolian plate, is pushing north. Okay? Now it's pushing the Anatolian plate, but the Anatolian plate can't also move north because there's a massive, even larger plate called the Eurasian plate that lies to the north. So as a consequence, it's kind of being squeezed, kind of like if you hold a banana at one end and squeeze it. You see how it shoots out? Okay, so it's moving in a western direction. Okay, and the fault line, okay, that you see all along the north, called the North Anatolian Fault Line, is a fault line that is doing 2 things. It's subducting, that is, it's going underneath the fault of the Eurasian plate, and it's also a strike-slip fault line, which means that it's moving in an east-west direction. Actually, Anatolia is moving to the west, where the Eurasian plate is not moving a whole lot, but the little bit of movement that it has is moving to the east. And so as a consequence, we can track and you can see some of the fault lines as depicted on the slide here. Another picture, once again, the Arabian plate to the south, the Anatolian plate in the middle of the screen, and then the Eurasian plate further to the north. Now, what is happening, or I should say what has happened, sometime in the past, okay, there was probably significant, I mean really significant, unparalleled historic seismic activity that has caused the region of the Black Sea to drop. And as a consequence, waters from the Mediterranean Sea, which are salt waters, flushed into the Aegean Sea and into the Sea of Marmara and up through the Bosphorus and filled up the Black Sea. Let me zoom in. This area you see where it says Troas there? That's the land of ancient Troy, okay? But you'll notice that there's a waterway there called the Dardanelles, okay? And that's where a historic battle took place, actually, in World War I. You can still see the battlefield and some of the remains and the burial places of those who died at, it's called Gallipoli, okay? But that waterway was probably cut during this period of time and then filled up that area called the Propontis. Today it's not called the Propontis, instead it's called the Sea of Marmara. And then Further to the north, we have that waterway at Byzantium. Byzantium later was known as Constantinople, which today is called Istanbul, and it cut that channel. So let me show you another photo, a little bit better here. Okay? You can see where that waterway was cut through the Dardanelles into the Sea of Marmara, and then that channel of the Bosphorus Strait. And here's even better shot. This is really quite an amazing waterway. You can actually take boat rides up the Bosphorus to the Black Sea from Istanbul. If you go all the way down to the southern end of the Bosphorus, that is Istanbul. So, what do we know from this underwater research that has been conducted? Human habitation. Research has shown that there were villages, ancient villages, some 155 meters below the current level of the Black Sea. That's 500 feet below the current level of the Black Sea, which means there were people living there in the past. 500 feet below the current level of the Black Sea. Of course, anoxic level, lacking oxygen, layer of the Black Sea. The anoxic layer is even deeper, okay, 200 meters. And so this allows for the preservation of organic materials at these deeper levels. So what causes decay? Well, it's bacteria, organisms, of course, that eat and consume wood and things of that sort. One of the things that they have discovered, well, let me get to this first. These scholars who have been doing the research have concluded that there was abrupt major flooding some 7,500 years ago, at which time the Bosphorus Channel was cut when waters from the Mediterranean Sea flowed into the Black Sea, raising the sea levels by some 150 meters. It's at that time that the Black Sea changed from fresh water to salt water, or at least the lower layers. So this is a drawing of the Black Sea. You can see the distinction between the modern shoreline and then in tan. Is it tan color? Help me out here. What color is it? What's that? No, I'm talking about the area up towards Ukraine. What is it? Dark green. I always get green and brown mixed up. But that is what is originally thought to have been the shoreline in the past. But now that has been filled, and the current contours of the Black Sea are what you see in the surrounding region. Genesis chapter 7, which describes the flood, says, all of the fountains of the deep burst open. That could also be understood or translated as the unfathomable ocean broke open. What does that mean? Oceans breaking open. Oceans don't break open. Could it be seismic activity that's actually being described here? And the floodgates of the sky were opened, and the rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. As a consequence, the Black Sea, you can see is it a blue line? The blue line indicates what was the ancient sea level, about 155 meters below the current level of the Black Sea, and how much that water has filled in. Now, we know that salt water is heavier than fresh water. You're aware of that, aren't you? If you swim in salt water, you're much more buoyant than you are in fresh water. Okay? So what probably happened is that when this seismic activity took place and all the salt water rushed into the Black Sea, it probably pushed a lot of the the fresh water back and then flowed down in, that's why it's settled down at the bottom part of the Black Sea. And then what has come up over the top then is the fresh water. And then for the however many thousands of years, I'm not going to try and date this, okay, waters from the surrounding mountains have continued to fill in the top parts of the Black Sea. So we now have this unusual phenomenon of an anoxic, very dense layer of salt water and hydrogen sulfide at the bottom of the lake, and then you have fresher water, brackish water, and fresh water up at the top. Now, something else that's quite interesting is off the coast of Bulgaria, there are, well, not just off the coast of Bulgaria, there have been several shipwrecks that have been discovered in the Black Sea, but some of these shipwrecks are down below the anoxic layer. So as a consequence, they have not rotted, and many of these shipwrecks are in really good shape. So these are photographs they send down, you know, these kind of like submarine things that'll photograph, and then they put together composite photos. These are some shots of what is considered to be the earliest shipwreck ever discovered, dating back to around 400 BC. And it's amazing how well preserved they are. So deep in the Black Sea. Here you can see even rope. To give you some perspective, how far down is this? Well, they show you over onto the right-hand side how many Empire State Buildings you have to go down to get to this wreck. This is a wreck that's been preserved now for 2,400 years. Earliest ancient wreck. And what is amazing about this is not only that it's the earliest, but it has been so well preserved because it happens to be in the Black Sea in this anoxic layer. And then you can see kind of a drawing over on the left-hand side of this slide that gives you an idea as to what this ship would have looked like back in the day. Okay, once again, Genesis chapter 7, all the fountains of the great deep broke up. Now, the Black Sea research that was conducted in the year 2000 and the research that has been conducted since then over the last 24 years is, you know, again, giving us a great deal of information about what was happening back in those days. But it's also interesting because back in the 1950s, another study was conducted with regard to the Persian Gulf. So this is on the southern side of what would be Turkey, okay, and Mesopotamia. And the research I'm quoting here from Lees and Falcon says, in the distant past, large inland areas of Mesopotamia were submerged by waters from the Persian Gulf, possibly by extraordinary undersea eruptions. Eruptions, or perhaps seismic activity. So we really have two separate ends of it, the Black Sea, okay, and then the southeastern end of Mesopotamia, where we have research that indicates that there was significant flooding in both of these areas. Now, I've mentioned before that people who have been doing archaeological work in Mesopotamia have discovered many of these cuneiform tablets. Most of these cuneiform tablets are financial transactions. Many of them are chronicles of kings and some of the rulers. But this tablet, and actually several have been found, most of them portions, okay? This is what is called the Gilgamesh epic. Maybe some of you have heard about the Gilgamesh epic. The Gilgamesh epic is a story about an individual by the name of Utnapishtim. And Utnapishtim was instructed by God to construct a boat, okay, and to fill it with animals because the god Ea was going to send a flood to destroy all the world. So he did so. The floods came, and at the end of the flood, similar to what we read about in the book of Genesis, birds were released until they returned, indicating that there was dry land. Okay? And as a consequence, the boat rested upon Mount Nitshir, which is in northern Assyria, which is right in the same area that we've been talking about. Okay? With the Urartu civilization in the Urartu Mountains. So we're scratching our heads, okay? We put this information together, and what's interesting is that we have several accounts of this ancient flood, okay? What we call the Gilgamesh epic. We have an Akkadian version, which is given the title, The One Who Saw the Abyss. This is written between 1300 and 1000 BC. We know that it was compiled, put together from earlier sources. We have also an even earlier, what is called an Old Babylonian account, and this is called Surpassing All Other Kings. And this is an account that has a lot to say, but just a portion of it has this story which we call the Gilgamesh epic. It's fragmentary. 11 pieces of the story on tablets have been found dating between the 1800 and 1600 16th centuries BC. And then, of course, we have the biblical flood narrative, which we read about in the book of Genesis, which, written by Moses, was written probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about 1300 BC. Now, how do we reconcile these accounts? Now, you've got people who offer all kinds of theories. Many people suggest that the biblical account was just copying from these Mesopotamian accounts. Okay? But I think there's ample evidence to indicate that the biblical account is independent of these Mesopotamian accounts. And I think what we have here are three separate independent accounts: an Akkadian version, a Babylonian version, and a Jewish Hebrew version of an epic flood that had taken place. Now, the details are, we can nitpick about, the different details in the Akkadian version, the Babylonian version, but essentially they say the same thing, which speaks to me to the effect that there was something, a massive flood that was recollected by these ancient civilizations. We put that together with what we've been talking about. What happened up at the Black Sea? Well, I think there is evidence that there is something behind what we read about in the book of Genesis. So it's impossible to determine how old the story of the flood is. Now, all of these stories, whether it's the Akkadian, the Babylonian, the Hebrew version, go back to earlier traditions. How far back, we don't know, okay? But again, I think the testimony of these stories is enough to tell us that something dramatic and significant had taken place. That's it. Questions, comments? Bill. He's going to check in and tell us all about the... Okay. The beams that came from what?
The beams that were supposedly found
under the Black Sea.
Were they dated?
Um,
I thought you were talking about the British guys who found
oh,
real beams, moved them.
yes, those were found to be Byzantine period beams. So no, those, that was a fraud. Ancient people lots of times want people to come to their area to visit because it kickstarts their economy. They have money that they can be making out of things of this sort, and that's evidently what has happened. But it's convinced some people that it's real. Bruce?
The three stories that you just mentioned, the cave, Babylonian, Hebrew stories, and you said that there's evidence that they are independently written. What is that evidence?
Well, because they're from different regions, from different areas. And the date that separates them, and also some of the details. The details are, there's enough difference in the details to indicate that they weren't copying one from another. I mean, that's also something that some scholars would say, in spite of that, the differences that are found, in spite of the fact that there are different locations, some people would argue that the biblical account is simply a copy of these ancient traditions that go back to the regions of Mesopotamia. I'm not convinced.
You mentioned I don't recall the name of the mountain where you said there's a lot of mines.
Judy Da.
Yeah. And you also mentioned the existence of an ancient Byzantine
Church.
church. Can you speak a little bit more of how that provides evidence? I think I know, but it would be helpful to know.
Maybe I didn't mention, the Byzantine church is in the shape of a boat. Did I neglect to say that? I didn't say that? Okay. Well, the fact that there's a church up there and I haven't seen it because I've never been up on the mountain, but I have seen a picture, an old picture, and it's a church that is in the shape of a ship or a boat, which leads you to believe that the early Christians believed that this was the place where it happened. So I'm sorry I leave out sometimes important details.
When I got to be in Israel, a lot of Byzantine churches were built on sites where Jesus did something for.
Right.
I'm pretty sure that something happened there. So.
Yeah. Byzantine, not all Byzantine churches, but some Byzantine churches in particular were built on sites where something biblical happened. So again, it's not, slam dunk proof that that's where the ark rested, but at least it demonstrates that many early Christians believed it was there.
What is your take on a worldwide compared to these stories?
I wasn't there. There's different views. There are some people who claim that it was a worldwide flood, and they would look to the Grand Canyon, for instance, and see, hey, here's levels or indication of the sediment as it was laid down, going all the way back to the period of the flood. I don't know. Others would say that it was local. And that's why I pointed out we have, at least for the area of Mesopotamia, evidence of seismic activity and significant flooding, not only at the Black Sea, but also at the other end when we go down to the Persian Gulf. And so I do believe that there was a cataclysmic, historic, unparalleled flood that had taken place. And I think probably due to seismic activity, but whether or not it was worldwide or local, it's hard to say. Some people believe that unless you follow their program of a young earth, a worldwide biblical flood, that somehow your Christian faith is hollow. I don't think they would go so far as to say you're not Christian, but I think we need to have some wiggle room here, because the first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis are so far back in history, and it's also communicating to people who are pre-scientific. people who don't know how big the world is, and to make such suggestions that it was a worldwide flood. While I would say it's possible, is it likely? I don't know. Likewise, those who want to date the earth, and these are sticky issues, even with students when I teach the book of Genesis, there are some students who are, it's got to be young earth, and I'm not convinced that it's as young as what some people would want to date it. I shared previously about Bishop Ussher, and when he affixed a date, said that creation took place at 4004 BC. Well, it's quite evident that Ussher was flawed, because what he was doing is he was adding the numbers of the genealogies in the book of Genesis. And today we know, because of what I shared with you before, colophons, remember? Colophons are final sentences that you find in a lot of these ancient inscriptions, where they tell you where this information came from. And it documents histories of families where there's jumps. In other words, it's not necessarily a father-son relationship that's reported in the book of Genesis, because I think what Moses was documenting here are the colophons of probably some of these ancient tablets that he had come under possession of. So, gopher. I couldn't answer that question. I don't know what gopher wood is. I don't know. Does anyone else know gopher wood? Natalie?
No, I'm sorry, I have no idea.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't provide an answer for gopher wood. I don't know what it is. Well, thank you. Thank you. You've been good to me. And next week we'll get together. Perhaps next week we'll talk about Abraham. Now we're getting into something more concrete, okay? A little less speculation. We know a lot about Abraham. And we'll share a little bit of that when we get together next week. So see you then.